All right, everyone. Well, it is noon and I've got the recording started, so we'll go ahead and kick this off. Hello, everyone. This is Rebecca Dowling, Assistant Superintendent for Stormwater Quality here at the City of Oklahoma City. I'd like to officially welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn event. I hope everyone has a tasty lunch and is ready to hear from our guest speaker. We will begin momentarily, so I want to provide some information to help enhance everyone's experience during the presentation today. In order to reduce background noise, we ask that everyone keep themselves muted during the presentation. If anyone has any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into chat. I'll be monitoring chat for questions and we'll have our guest speaker answer as many questions as we have time for today. If anyone would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, please send me an email to request it, and I'll put my email address into chat right now so you have it handy. Each of the presentations in this virtual Lunch and Learn series will be recorded and available on our website within a week or so, and I'll post a link to the website toward the end of today's program. We will be removing the old links to last year's webinar series to make room for the new ones. The previous recordings are still going to be available on YouTube, so if anyone needs a copy of those links, please email me and I'll be happy to send them to you. And of course, if anyone has any questions at this time, please feel free to type them into chat. Up next is our main presentation for today's webinar. Today we're going to hear from Josh Rasp of Triangular Silt Dike Company. With over 20 years experience in the erosion and sedimentation control industry, Josh joined Triangular Silt Dike Company as an outside technical sales representative in 2018. Prior to that, he managed a successful site restoration contracting and consulting company. Josh has technical experience in soil health, native grass restoration, wetland and riparian mitigation and construction, and stormwater pollution prevention plan compliance. He has been a part of over 5,000 acres restored from the Great Lakes to the Rio Grande. A lot of acreage, Josh. All right. Again, if anyone has any questions during today's presentation, please be sure to type them into chat. Josh, go ahead and share your screen and start your presentation, and I'll stop sharing mine. And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now, Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay. All right, are you able to see the screen now, Rebecca?
No.
Uh-oh.
We just tried it and it worked great. And of
I
course
know.
now when we're recording, it's like all the pressure's on, and so it's not going to work.
And now it's, there we go. Wow, Rebecca, now it's asking me to send a link. We just had this.
Go ahead and just hit that share tray again. The up arrow, and go to window, and then choose your presentation.
Yeah. Sorry. Bear with me.
I think it's working. It's thinking about it. It's trying to work.
Trying to.
Okay, there we go. Now if you'll hit from beginning, I think it should work.
All right. Have you got it now?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Very good. All right, well, thank you for your patience. I think we got it figured out. I'd like to start out by saying thank you to Rebecca and the Oklahoma City Stormwater team at large. We appreciate the opportunity opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and Triangular Silt Dike Company in general appreciates the opportunity to speak and to be a part of this. Outreach engagement is important to us, and any chance that we get to be available to speak and be part of an interactive engagement, we do appreciate it. I like to start out talking about, so I'm going to kind of go into a little bit of detail about different BMPs, their proper usages, what works in what situation, and kind of the whys behind it. I like to start out with kind of a bigger view, and to start more broadly by talking about the most important BMPs. Number one being a plan. And by plan, I don't necessarily mean the erosion control and sedimentation control plan that you have in a set of documents given to you by the engineer or the architect for a construction project, or your SWIP, but a plan by clearly defining who is responsible for what, right? A team meeting where people come together and define roles and objectives and understand who is responsible for what and at what times. As it relates to construction projects, there are different ways of achieving stormwater compliance from like an inspection and SWIP maintenance standpoint. A lot of companies, a lot of people choose to do that work in-house. Some choose to hire a third-party company or a contractor to take care of that work. But part of that plan and part of defining who is responsible for what is establishing triggers and thresholds. By that, I mean, at what point does somebody else become responsible for something else? At what point does somebody need approval, prior approval for work? I like to think of the idea of having budgets, monthly budgets, that takes care of the day-to-day, week-to-week, and the month-to-month inspections, cleanup, minor repairs, versus the bigger ticket items. We can easily define kind of what needs to be done as laid out to us by our stormwater discharge permits, but what happens when we get 3 or 4 days of rain a week for 2 or 3 weeks in a row? What happens when we get, big rains, the big unforeseen stuff that kind of blows out and throws a lot of the hard work kind of into the wind? Let's establish those triggers and thresholds from the beginning so that when those occurrences happen, action can be taken immediately without lag time for approvals. Part of having a plan is defining how much ground actually needs to be disturbed at any one given time. I drive on this quite a bit. Maybe the most effective BMP is undisturbed ground, right? Ground that's percolates water, ground that slows water down, ground that filters sediments and nutrients and pollutants before being discharged off-site. Particularly in big construction sites, when we move big iron onto a job, it's most cost effective to push and move and haul and compact as much dirt as possible at any one given time. But that does open ourselves, and it opens the permittee up to additional liability. It's more disturbed ground. There's more potential for erosion. And when there's potential for erosion, there's potential for offsite discharge. So I always like to ask the question, do we need to disturb as much ground right from the get-go, or can things be managed a little bit differently and maybe staged out a little bit differently to reduce those liabilities? BMP number 2 that I like to talk about is being proactive. We all know that we're given this erosion sedimentation control plan. We all know that we've got a stormwater management or a stormwater pollution prevention plan. We know that we are required to do the things that are outlined for us, again, by engineers or by architects, and then suggested by inspectors. But sometimes we don't really think that plan, that SWIP, that stormwater pollution prevention plan, is intended to be a living document. It's intended to change. It's intended to be reworked, revised, added to, deleted from, as is the erosion and sedimentation control plan, meaning that piece of paper in those set of prints. Those are meant to be redlined. Those are meant to be changed. They're meant to evolve with time. By being proactive, what I mean by that is go above and beyond, do the things that may not necessarily be lined out on the plan and in the SWIP, but try new things out, do things, learn from past experiences. If something doesn't work, i.e. silt fence gets overtopped or blown out because of a big rain, don't necessarily go back and do the same thing over and over again because it is on a plan sheet, but try something new. I think most city inspectors that I've dealt with and that I know and that I continue to deal with and talk to on a pretty regular basis like to see a contractor or a permittee being proactive, trying new things, trying to go above and beyond in the sense. So I think if you think about those idealistic BMPs right from the get-go, it makes it easier to take on the subsequent more tangible BMPs down the road. I also like to kind of define the differences between erosion and sediment control. We see this plan sheet that talks about erosion and sediment control. I like to draw a distinction between sediment and sedimentation. You'll notice there I've got the ATION in parentheses. I'll get into that more here in a second, but let's understand that there are two different processes. There's erosion and then there's sedimentation. Erosion is very simply just the displacement of soil, right? It's soil put into movement. It's soil being removed from its complacent in situ state. It's happy state of just sitting peacefully on the soil. And that can happen several different ways, primarily in construction. It's driven by wind, rain, and even the individual raindrops. But if you kind of think about that soil sitting in its happy state, even wind is not a very erosive force until that soil is disturbed by, let's say, vehicular traffic or rain or something else that disturbs it from the get-go, from its in situ state. So it takes an active force to dislodge soil and pollutants from its happy state. If we think about erosion, if we think about those different ways of causing erosion, it's driven primarily by two different factors: impact and movement. Impact can be driven by the tire action, the vehicular traffic that I talk about, but it can also be caused by raindrops. Movement, I think of movement as being the movement of water. So the movement of collected raindrops that become sheet flow that then concentrate down the line, right, and gain velocity and gain volume as it moves and becomes a bigger entity as it moves down the line. Now we'll step over kind of to the sedimentation side. Again, sediment is at its most basic just a soil particle, right? But sedimentation is the deposition of soil particles, right? So sediment and sediment control, in my mind, is kind of a moot point. What we really need to be worried about is where those sediment particles are deposited, right? So we need to be concerned about where sedimentation occurs. Where do those soil particles settle? Is it settling in front of a silt fence? Is it settling in a filter device? And I'm speaking about sediment as well as debris and pollutants. Are they being collected and captured on site within a device that has been pre-selected and put into place to serve a function? Or are they getting by that, and are they getting into a water conveyance? Are they overtopping a detention or retention pond? Are they getting into a storm drain system? Are they ending up in the Deep Fork River? That's what's important. The intent and purpose of stormwater discharge permits is to minimize offsite discharge. We can't all be perfect. It's going to happen and it's going to occur. But when we're proactive and when we do everything we can do to minimize that offsite discharge, then we're kind of winning the overall battle. It matters, those two different ideas matter in the sense that, like any other task, there's a right tool for the job. So if we think about, are we trying to target erosion or are we trying to target sedimentation? Those two different ideas indicate two different toolboxes, in a sense, that we need to be looking from and picking from when we are selecting the proper BMPs. Take a little deeper dive into erosion control. Like I brought up earlier, erosion, basically driven by impact or movement. It's like peeling off the layers of an onion. We can peel back that erosion onion. We can peel back one more layer and ask ourselves whether that erosion is driven by impact or movement. If we look at movement specifically to start with, then we start thinking about what are the best BMPs that we can utilize to minimize erosion from an impact standpoint. Standing vegetation, like I talked about earlier, is number one. So that can come from either not disturbing it to start with or by stabilizing it as quickly as possible afterwards. That could be achieved by sodding it. It can be achieved by seeding it with a mulch. I'll dive into that a little bit further here in a second. We've got mulch here. Anything that dissipates the impact of raindrops, anything that dissipates the impact of vehicular traffic, those are the things that prevent the soil particles from being disturbed, which opens them up to the ability to be moved later on down the line, creating the erosion. So if we can keep soil particles, pollutants, and debris intact and in place, then we can prevent their movement down the line in a big rain event, windy days, etc. If we look at the second part of erosion control and look at the movement side, we can peel off another layer of the onion and we can look at that from a sheet flow standpoint versus a concentrated flow standpoint, right? As rain increases, water increases, standing water increases, water that does not percolate into the soil begins to gain in volume and gain in concentration. Sheet flow, particularly, water moving over a big broad area. Again, we go to grass and undisturbed areas or restored areas are the greatest way to minimize that flow and to slow things down so that pollutants are settled and do begin to percolate into place. Where we don't have undisturbed ground or reestablished, or perhaps where we do, but we need additional protections in place, then we start thinking about things like silt fence, our triangular silt dike barriers, and things like straw wattles, compost filter socks. When we move over to the concentrated flow, right now we have gathered more water into place. It has a higher potential for moving pollutants and moving sediments. So now we need beefier BMPs in a sense. Again, I don't know if you've noticed the trend here, undisturbed vegetation or restored vegetation is always better than bare ground or concrete or asphalt for that matter. Undisturbed ground or restored vegetation is fantastic at slowing things down, but again, we need to step down. That's not always the case. So then we look at these beefier BMPs that I'm talking about. Again, our triangular silt dike barriers, very versatile. They can be used for sheet flows. They can be used for diverting water. They can be used in high concentrations, such as ditch checks and such. Wattles and socks, I mentioned those on the sheet flow side of things, but it's also important to kind of point out here, and we'll get into a little bit more detail later, but typically wattles are not very heavy. They're not very capable to standing up to concentrated flows. They can be used in more concentrated flows, but they need to be used more frequently in order to slow water down to reduce velocities. Compost socks, compost filter socks, you'll hear them called different things. kind of a similar application. They can be used when concentrated flows, but as things get greater velocity, you need more frequency of their use. Rock bags and checks can be used as, when I mentioned the rock bags, that's something we're all familiar with, simply the woven fabric bags filled with rock or sometimes sand. Rock checks, meaning more like gabion basket lids, something a little bit stronger that's meant to handle, intensive concentrated flows. Turf reinforcement mats, those are different from the impact devices that I'm talking about over there, just the regular old blankets. Turf reinforcement mats are typically made out of synthetic fibers with high UV degradability built into them. They're made to last forever. They're made to be permanent and to give structure to roots to hold vegetation in place. Fleximat is a tied concrete block mat system we'll get into a little bit more. Again, designed to prevent erosion. These are not sedimentation control devices. These are erosion control BMPs. They are designed to hold soil in place, not so much catch soil, but to hold soil in place. So again, if we look at this, I'm going to go back one more. So we're going to start kind of on the impact side and then move over to the erosion side. Coming back. So we're going to start with mulches. Very effective at minimizing my computer. It's kind of moving on its own here for a second. Let's get back to it. Bear with me. She's moving on her own right now. Maybe I hit too many buttons too quickly. So let's start here with mulches. Again, the main function of mulches is to minimize the displacement of soil particles from the impact, right? So mulches are designed to absorb the energy, be it from okay, I'm gonna try to make sure we're not doing this automatically here. All right, so mulches designed to minimize the impact of either raindrops or vehicular traffic, right? There are different varieties of mulches that can be used. We'll start out here with chippings. Chippings meaning vegetation that was on site of a construction project that was run through a grinder or a chipper as opposed to being burned on site or hauled off. It can be an expensive process to grind things up. Obviously, burning is far less expensive than chipping. But if you have chosen and have on-site chippings, then utilizing those chippings on-site is a very cost-effective mulch, right? You're making use of something that would have otherwise been a waste product. Chippings are very effective at dissipating the raindrop impact, right? And that is where erosion starts. I like to point out that chippings typically should be thought of as a temporary use. They probably need to be removed prior to final stabilization, right? They're difficult to sod over. You can seed through them, but they also throw off kind of the carbon to nitrogen ratio in soil a little bit, right? They're high in carbon, and so they can have a tendency to kind of bind up available nitrogen in soil. So if you utilize wood chippings on site to minimize that raindrop impact and to keep soil in place, keep in mind it's going to most likely need to be removed prior to getting good vegetation established. Compost is another relatively cost-effective mulch that can be used. I think we're seeing a lot more buzz around compost in the Oklahoma City metro area here lately. Compost is an idea. Utilizing compost as an erosion control product is something that's been around for a long time. There are lots of good studies out there about the benefits of compost use. Jason Vogel at the Oklahoma Water, I think he's the Oklahoma Water Survey. Not exactly sure what entity these studies are being done, but kind of a partnership with, there's some work being done with ODOT and maybe the Water Resources Board and OU in general as to compost and its usage as an erosion control product and as a nutrient filtering device, as a pollutant filtering device. I know that there's going to be more data coming out on compost and its use with kind of an Oklahoma-centric background to it. There are different kinds of compost. It's important to be an informed consumer in the sense that know what you're getting when you're buying compost. It has excellent filtering capacity. It can be very good for the soil. It's also very good at dissipating the energy of raindrops. However, if compost is not cooked down properly, there's the potential that it could leach more pollutants into water than they are retaining, i.e. they may discharge more nitrogen and phosphorus if they've not been cooked down properly to a stable state. So be an informed consumer. Compost is something to keep an eye out for. I think it's gaining a lot more traction in and around Oklahoma City, and it's something that I think is pretty cool, and I think we can all make more use of it in the future. Straw blowing is another very cost-effective way at minimizing impacts of raindrops, minimizing the potential for soil to be dislodged and put into an erosive state. Must be hitting the wrong button. We're going too fast here. Straw mulch is an inexpensive and readily available material, right? There's hay straw. There's also native grass. You know, just hay. Hay can be used, or excuse, I said hay straw. There's wheat straw. And hay that are readily available in Oklahoma most years. Kind of expensive this last year with the rain situation, most of it being fed, but it is still, relatively speaking, an inexpensive and available material to be used as a mulch. As we know, it's windy around pretty much every part of Oklahoma, so hay and straw needs to be adhered to the soil in one way or another. Very oftentimes it's crimped into the soil, where a mechanical plow is not the right word necessarily. It's usually a straight shank. It's not turning the soil. Instead, it's pressing the fibers of the hay and straw into the soil, and so they actually kind of flip up like this, and they're crimped in a manner that keeps them from blowing away. Another way to do that is to apply a tackifier and essentially a glue, something that will hold that straw or that hay into place. Typically, when you think about mulch applications, straw or hay mulch applications, you're thinking about that in tons per acre. It takes an awful lot to do good, right? It's quick. It can be done very quickly with the right equipment, and it's readily available. Moving on to hydromulching a little bit. This is something else. I can go into that into a little bit more detail here in another slide, but I'm a big proponent of hydromulching. I know that a lot of people, everybody knows what it is. Everybody's heard of it. Some people have had experiences with it. We'll dive into that a little bit more. But again, it's a very quick, very versatile mulch application. It can be achieved on steep slopes. I think that's really where hydromulching can shine, is that it can be done on steep slopes where it may be too dangerous or just not practical to get equipment, heavy equipment, i.e. tractors, to crimp soil or to crimp straw into place, or places where it's not safe to run equipment to establish sod. There are different types of hydromulches out there. Just like blankets and many other BMPs, many manufacturers, all with different varieties and different blends. They can be tailored to suit certain applications. Hydromulching can be used with or without seed. It's important, and a great use of hydromulching is simply using it as a temporary cover. Simply, the mulch itself can be temporary cover, whether grass is growing through it or not. So you can use it with or without seed. I usually recommend using seed with it because that's kind of an inexpensive component to the slurry that would be applied to the ground. In my opinion, you may as well need seed most of the time, unless it presents a weed issue later on down the road from the perspective of the landscaper. It may be easier to leave seed out of the mix and just cover things with the hydromulch alone. Again, this is similar to the compost in that I recommend everybody's an informed buyer, an informed consumer. Know what you're getting. Ask applicators how much they're using. Understand how much mulch should be used for any one given slope or time of the year. Ask the questions and make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. For hydromulching to work and be effective, I think it's important that the buyer's expectations jive with the reality of the application. Kind of dive into those a little bit more. I like to think of hydromulching as being a very versatile BMP. It can perform multiple functions in that it immediately reduces the impact of raindrops, right? So it's holding soil into place. Because of its textured nature, it can slow velocities. So therefore slow the runoff, which allows more water percolation into the soil. And then obviously we can grow grass seed from it. So as the mulch is sitting on the ground longer and longer, the benefits go up and up. Again, I've talked about different varieties, different blends available specific to a job site. Again, typically application rates are measured in pounds per acre. I think it's important. I show these two pictures here because we've seen a lot of bad hydromulching. We've probably seen a lot of other good hydromulching. These are pictures of good hydromulching. It's important to point out the total coverage in these two pictures. To be effective, hydromulch needs to be applied from two different directions with no shadows. What I mean by that is you don't see any bare dirt in any of those in those two pictures, right? If there are clumps and clods, if you apply that mulch from one direction, the backside of that clump and clod is going to be bare dirt, right? That's going to be a spot that sheet flows coming downhill are going to be able to get underneath that barrier of the hydromulch that you create, right? And that is a spot in which that hydromulch can be washed out. So to be most effective, hydromulch needs to be applied from two different angles, whether it's on top of the hill and the bottom of the hill spraying in, or whether it's from one side to the other. It's important that it's hit from both different directions. Blankets. We know primarily straw blankets, wood blankets, Excelsior fiber blankets, also known as Curlex. There's also coconut fiber and jute blankets. Those are rolled products. We typically stock, and we found it to be our sweet spot to have the Excelsior fiber, the Curlex blankets, bottom right-hand picture, and the top left picture, straw blankets. Straw is generally one of your least expensive blankets. They're good at dissipating raindrop impact, but they're less effective at slowing sheet flow. And the reason for that is, if you think of straw fibers, they're called straw for a reason, right? They're hollow casings of plant fiber, right? They're the stems. And so they're slick, they're hollow, which means they're lightweight, and they don't absorb any water. Sheet flows can actually hit straw blankets and, in a sense, speed up a little bit as they wind their way around those straw fibers. And so any flows, be it sheet or concentrated, have a tendency to wash out underneath straw blankets very quickly because you've got the two actions happening, right? The straw's hollow, it floats. The water speeds up and goes underneath the straw. So for any sort of flow activities, I recommend the Curlex fibers, the Excelsior fibers. Straw, again, not to knock on it, it's a very inexpensive blanket and it's very good at dissipating the energy of the raindrop. Excelsior fibers, Curlex. Curlex is the name brand, most well known. Curlex, we are a Curlex distributor. Curlex is manufactured by American Excelsior Fiber Company. And so Curlex is made from aspen wood. The way it is processed, these fibers, individual wood fibers interlock and they create a cohesive blanket. And because they are the wood fibers and not a hollow straw fibers, they actually absorb moisture. They absorb rain. They do not float, so they've got a lower coefficient. They're gonna sink and adhere to the soil surface as opposed to float when saturated. So when a sheet flow comes onto a Curlex fiber or an Excelsior blanket, it's less likely to undermine that blanket and less likely to dislodge the soil underneath it. So therefore, those interlocking fibers are excellent at, not only dissipating the raindrop energy, but also reducing the runoff velocity. So sediment can actually be trapped under those blankets. It's those characteristics that make a Curlex fiber or an Excelsior fiber superior to the straw on slopes, especially when establishing seed. Reinforcements and armaments. So we're basically talking about blankets, but stepping that up one notch, right? High performance turf reinforcement mats are still in a rolled erosion control product. So they look similar to a blanket. The two blankets that I discussed previously, they are applied in the same manner, right? They're still rolled out and they're still pinned into place. But what differentiates a turf reinforcement mat from an erosion control product is that the turf reinforcement mats are designed to be permanent. Typically, they're made out of non-biodegradable materials, oftentimes recycled materials, synthetic. They've got UV protection built into them. Typically with much higher velocities built into their standard performance data and much steeper slopes as well. And more varied soil types also. Seed can be applied to the soil with the turf reinforcement mat laid over the front of it or over the top of it, or they can be infilled with soil and sodded right over the top. They are designed for the higher flows and higher concentrations that typical blankets can't stand up to. Fleximat is another armament, one step further than the high performance turf reinforcement mats I was talking about. Everybody may be familiar with Fleximat at this point, but basically that is a concrete block that is formed into a geogrid. So you've got the benefits of concrete and the benefits of riprap with, married up with the benefits of a geogrid. So it's got structural integrity laterally and longitudinally. It is designed to stand up to very high velocities, very high shear strength. But what makes Fleximat unique is that it's also designed to grow vegetation. It is designed for grass to grow right through it. I like to point out, though, maybe particularly with a crowd that's a little bit more on the industrial discharge side of things, there are a variety of backing options for the Fleximat. We get them with a Curlex blanket, which is that Excelsior fiber I was talking about previously, and a high performance turf reinforcement mat rolled up into the Fleximat. But we can also get it with a non-woven fabric rolled up in it for situations where vegetation is not the end result. So they can be used even as conveyances through parking lots. They can be infilled with millings, asphalt millings, or even gravel, and made for permanent use without vegetation. So we've been talking about erosion control. Now I'm going to step into some BMPs that are erosion and sedimentation control. And I see them kind of running a little bit long here, so I'm going to maybe kind of blaze through here for a quick second. We all know an awful lot about silt fence, right? It's important to break long runs of silt fence up into smaller runs. This picture is a good illustration of a J-hook. It divides the sheet flow up so that no one section of silt fence is being overburdened by too much rainfall. I like to pose this question. If, you know, when any one particular BMP fails, ask why. Why did it fail? Was it an improper installation, or was it the wrong application for that BMP? Is there something better that can be used, something else that can be used? Wattles and socks. Again, there are straw wattles and there are compost filter socks that are kind of the go-tos here. They can be used as erosion and sedimentation control devices in the sense that they can be used to interrupt slopes, which slows velocity. Then they act as filtering devices by letting water flow through them and collect sediment and pollutants. Our triangular silt dike barriers, very durable, very versatile erosion and sedimentation control device. For those that aren't familiar, our triangular silt dike barriers are made from an open cell foam wrapped in a woven geotextile. So that's going to allow for durability, a long lifespan on those. They're not a filtering device like the wattles and composts filter socks are. They are a settling device primarily. Our triangular silt dike barriers have a skirt on the upstream side, which allows the water to run along that leading edge of the dike, which prevents scouring. So that's something that kind of sets them aside from the straw wattles and the compost filter socks. They're also very versatile in the sense that they can be used in a variety of different manners. Most of the time they're trenched into the ground and stapled into place, but they can also be glued onto pavement as well. Sediment control specifically, or sedimentation control more specifically. Here, I've added a couple of slides to the last time I did this. I wanted to bring up and kind of draw attention to a couple of other different products and different ideas. I think it's important to think about this when you think about erosion control and sedimentation control. The bang for the buck varies tremendously. Erosion control up at the top end of the food chain, you get the best bang for your buck. You've kept as many soil particles into place for the amount of money that you're spending. And as things move downhill and further down the line and become more concentrated, you're spending more money for number of soil particles saved, right? So when we start to get to the point of solely sedimentation control, we're thinking about things that are like our last ditch efforts, the last things we can do to prevent offsite discharge, right? So because of that, I think because of that skew that I'm talking about, there's more variety in the sedimentation control products than there are in the erosion control products. I get calls all the time about all manner of different products. Folks asking, do we stock this? Do we stock that? Can we get this or that? There's a wide variety of different sedimentation control products for any one given application. We stock what we found to kind of be the bread and butter. So there are lots of different things out there, but what we've got are kind of the tried and true that we found. I wanted to show this slide here of a turbidity curtain. I thought that was a great illustration. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the turbidity curtains, but wanted to illustrate that picture there. Bloxam inlet filter material, I think, is one that's probably got a lot of potential use for more the industrial crowd that may be around here or on this talk. This is a fiber that we carry in stock most of the time. We stock this rolled variety in the bottom right-hand picture. It's available in pads or rolls, but basically it's a filtering device that sits right on top of an inlet. It can be rolled up. In the picture that's in the bottom left, it can be rolled up to provide both inlet protection and that curb opening protection. It's flexible, durable, reusable, holds up to traffic very well. Basically, this Bloxam inlet filter material, you attach it to inlet grates without the need for lifting the grates. It's much easier than like the drop inlet bags, the dandy bags and such, where you've got your last ditch effort in that last bottleneck down inside a device that then requires you to pull the grate off the top and then lift the heavy bag out to be able to clean it. Instead, this material can be cleaned above ground. It can be cleaned and reused. Generally, the accumulated sediment and debris can be removed with a shovel. The inlet material itself can be brushed off, broomed off, cleaned up, and pollutants and sediments can be hauled off. It's reusable in the sense that once it becomes laden with sediments, you can cut the zip ties, retain the little yellow parts that you see there. That's part of the kit. You can retain those yellow pieces, cut the zip ties, keep the bag or keep the material, wash the material out, reinstall it simply with new zip ties. These things are, this product is designed for a usable life in greater than 6 months. MKB Storm Catcher. This is something we started selling out at Triangular Silt Dike Company about a year ago. This is a very durable yet flexible high flow and high retention wattle. So this is kind of somewhere, this is like next level of the straw wattle and the compost filter sock. This is very rugged. It's a very rugged woven textile outer tube, and it's filled with biodegradable rice hulls and gravel. They're very heavy. They're heavy enough to stay in place, but not too heavy to be moved around. They've got handles sewn right into that fabric, that woven fabric on the outside. They're made to be flexible, to be pulled into place. The thing I find interesting with them is the filler is a patented bioreactive combination of the heat-treated rice hulls and gravel. They are intended to be used, they are labeled to be used for oil sheen and heavy metal retention as well. It's kind of hard to put a number on some of the other wattles, compost filter socks, and even our triangular silt dikes on how much oil or heavy metals that they retain. We think that they probably do retain a fair bit, but this MKB Storm Catcher is actually designed to retain oil and heavy metals. They come typically in 4-foot and 8-foot sections. That's what we stock out at Triangular Silt Dike Company in Luther. However, we can customize and get different lengths as needed. In closing, I like to point out the idea that we value ongoing relationships, not just the sales. We've got a tremendous brain trust at Triangular Silt Dike Company. However, we don't pretend to know everything all the time. So I like to reach out to you guys. I like to ask you guys, what are the ongoing challenges? What has worked for you in the past? What doesn't work for you in the past, and why? You know, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if there's something that I can learn from you guys, I'm open to it. And if there's any information, any experience that we can share with you, it's reciprocated. I think the industrial permit side of things has not typically been in our wheelhouse, but it's something yet that we can learn more about. And I do think that myself and Bobby Gibson and Jason Roach and Gary Roach, if you've met any of us, we like a good challenge and we like to be problem solvers. So if there's anything else that we can help out with, help solve problems, help make things easier, let us know. Reach out at any time. I'd like to know how we can leverage our connections and our capabilities to help you guys. So if there are any questions or any thoughts anybody'd like to share, I'd like to open it up right now. Here's my contact info, so you can reach out at any time. Again, I'd like to stress the idea that we like to be problem solvers and we like to help out. So give us the challenge. Rebecca, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. I did post Josh's contact information into chat as well, and we had a few comments and a couple of questions as well. Let's see. Okay, so Rachel says, great information about Fleximat. Just had them come up on a project and wasn't sure if grass would grow between it or not, but it looks like it will, which was preferred for this project. So her project should work with the Fleximat. And then she asks, can Fleximats hold up to vehicular traffic? For example, something like an overflow parking lot. And then in the same token, can they hold up to tractors for mowing on the Fleximat? Oh, Josh, you're muted. There you go.
Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, gotcha. So yes, yes, and yes to those questions. A quick note about the Fleximat and its vegetative capabilities. At first manufactured the product, the blocks were, they had solid, they were perpendicular walls. They were simply cubes. And what they found was that created too small of a gap in between the blocks. And so it got very hot in between the two blocks. And then by making them pyramidal, it opened up the block space in between the blocks and allowed for greater vegetation. And so I've actually noticed in the heat of summer, you'll see grass growing better through the Fleximat than right next to it. And I think part of the reason for that is the retained soil moisture underneath the blocks themselves, right? That's not open to evapotranspiration. So yes, it is made for establishing vegetation. When it's used in a non-vegetative application, it's important that the space in between the blocks are infilled, and that can be done with sand. It can be done with gravel or chat or any sort of rock mulch. It can also be done with asphalt millings, but it's important that it's done and that it protects that geogrid from UV rays. Now, it's got a long UV rating, but still the geogrid needs to be covered up. And yes, if you'll shoot me an email, I can share with you some case studies about overflow parking, drivable surfaces, boat ramps, emergency vehicular parking in grassed areas. We've got case studies for all of that.
Okay, great. Rachel, if you want to reach out directly to Josh, feel free to do that. Otherwise, just you can go through me either way. Wayne asks, what is pertinent to control wind-blown soil particles such as fugitive dust?
Wayne, my experience in the past has been with mag chloride and asphaltic emulsions, and I think we'd all like to kind of get away from that as we can. We also know that there's a better way of doing things than just running water trucks over bare soil. There are polyacrylamides, PAMs out there. Gosh, what's the right term? There are PAMs and flocculants that can be easily applied with hydromulching equipment. Still, they're limited to the amount of traffic that is going to be allowed to go across those bare soils. Any traffic is going to minimize the life of whatever product that is put on it. And again, I found that a lot of those additives can be a little bit more cost prohibitive than straight hydromulch itself. Again, I'm a big proponent of hydromulching. It can be used as dust suppression if traffic is kept off of it. So you got to weigh how long are we going to stay off that ground? More traffic is going to drive the different type of application, but I can do more research for anybody on that and along products with the greatest longevity for dust suppression.
Sure, thank you. Rachel also mentioned she didn't realize that you could use compost to manage the raindrop impact. She said that she would have automatically assumed it would be a pollution issue. So she's looking forward to hearing more about that in the future. Didn't know if you had anything to add about the compost.
Caltrans, so essentially California Department of Transportation has got maybe kind of some of the best studies that I've come across that utilize composts. They call them compost filter blankets, and it's not a blanket in the sense that it's a rolled out product. It is simply a blanket that's applied. It's basically broadcasting composts and creating a blanket out of it. And so Caltrans has got lots of good studies out there and case studies about the utilization of composts as a covering, as a mulch, basically. And I've always been a little bit skeptical, but I have seen it. I have seen it firsthand where, I thought in a big rain around Oklahoma, you would just see that compost just roll and run right off the soil, right off the surface of the in situ soil below it. But it is very good at dissipating that energy of the raindrop, and then has a high percolation rate so that it does let that water through in a manner that doesn't allow it to saturate that compost and then slough it off. It's very impressive.
Cool. One more question from Rachel. Are turbidity curtains used as a permanent structure or typically just during the duration of a construction project?
Just temporary, unless, there may be an instance where you have, continuously have sediment laden waters coming into a pond or a lake or a river that may not necessarily be associated with any one particular construction project, right? So if you wanted to, I suppose you could use turbidity curtains permanently for water quality improvement. There are other ways of doing that as well that are probably far less expensive than turbidity curtains. And the idea that comes to mind would be using like coconut fiber in retention ponds. We've all seen that, where they reduce the turbidity of the water at a much cheaper cost than the turbidity curtains. So I guess to answer that question, yes, they could be used permanently. They're made out of durable enough materials that they'll last an awful long time. But the idea behind them is for temporary use, which brings up a good point. We sell turbidity curtains. They are an expensive one-time purchase. So if anybody's ever bought some from us, we've had people ask us in the past, will you buy those back from us? And I don't really like to buy them back from them, but if I can find somebody that's looking for a used turbidity curtain that meets their needs, I'd be glad to kind of wheel and deal on that as well. So if anybody's got any, let me know, or looking for some, and maybe I can find you a used one somewhere as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josh. And then Trish commented that she has used the Fleximat for fire access roads and subdivisions. It is rated for fire trucks. It can be mowed by a tractor or traditional mowers as well. The most important thing with Fleximat is for it to be installed correctly. So I'm sure that you would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well.
Like anything else, it's only as good as the installation. But that also brings up another good point: the fire lane access. There is another backing option that we can put with Fleximat that actually has a fire retardant in it, and so we can even get Fleximat that is fireproof for areas that are prone to burning or areas where prescribed burns frequently occur. So it's very, very versatile.
That's cool. Okay, I don't see any other questions. There's a few thank yous, Josh. So yes, thank you. You did such a great job. I appreciate your great presentation. I'm going to do a few quick closing comments, and then if anyone else has any questions, Josh, if you'd hang out for a few more minutes in case we see any more questions pop in, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody for your patience while I bounced back and forth from slide to slide. These things are hard to do when you're just looking at a computer screen and you don't have eye-to-eye contact. It's tough. So thank you for your patience.
Oh, of course. As a reminder, if anyone would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's presentation, please send me an email to request it. Make sure that you send me an email to my address, and I did post that into chat. And as I've mentioned, a recording of today's presentation should be available on our website within a week or so. And I did post a direct link to that page where you can find this year's webinars, lunch and learns, and any other recordings that are available there. And that again is in chat. So thanks everyone for attending today's session. We hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. We hope to see you again at one of our upcoming bi-monthly webinars. The next one is April 13th at 2 p.m. For our stormwater quality webinar series. The April presentation will be given by our construction section staff, and they'll be providing information on construction site inspections and record keeping. And if anyone still needs to register for either our bi-monthly webinar series or our training and education emails or quarterly e-newsletters, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to get you the information. Again, if you want a certificate of attendance, please send me an email to request that. I've posted my email address into chat. All right, well, that's all I have. Feel free to email me with any questions you have about this program, or if there's any questions that you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of the crowd. I know that we have some shy folks occasionally. Feel free to email me or Josh directly on that. Hope everyone has a great afternoon. I'm going to stop the recording, and then, but again, if anyone